So I was going to go through and, chop the film on all Pat Narduzzi's comments at his weekly press conference on Monday, all the things he said about Pitt's defense. I was going to go and clip those all up and do a whole episode today about, the Panthers defense and, intersperse the comments from Pat Narduzzi like we did yesterday with all the things that really stood out to me at his press conference. It just so happened that all those things were about offense. But then I scrolled through the transcript and rewatched the video to look for all the comments Pat Narduzzi made about his defense at the Monday press conference. And there wasn't a whole lot there. Not a lot of talk about Pitt's defense during Narduzzi's weekly press conference. He talked about Louisville's offense a decent amount, certainly during his opening comments where he previews the upcoming opponent. Got a question, I think, about Jeff Brohm and how he handles quarterbacks and transfer quarterbacks. He's got Miller Moss in there now, transfer from USC after he had Tyler Shugg, a transfer last year. And, kind of a question about how he's been able to work with transfer quarterbacks or what Narduzzi perceives. There was one question about Sean Lee, the freshman cornerback who started the last game after replacing Tamon Lynam 2 games ago, and he's now listed as an or starter with Tamon Lynam on the depth chart. But that was it. Out of the 15 or 16 minutes, however long it was that Narduzzi spoke on Monday, that was pretty much all to talk about defense. All the focus is on the offense, and rightfully so. You only scored 2 touchdowns. You have issues on offense. Your quarterback is struggling. You have issues on offense. Your offensive line is not blocking very well. You have issues on offense. And so it's understandable why we asked Pat Narduzzi about the offense so much. But what about the other side of the ball? Do we have a Morning Pitt last week where we said, has Pitt's defense been good enough? So I can't use that headline again, but I do think it's interesting to look at the defensive side, particularly since this will probably be the biggest challenge that group has faced so far this season. No disrespect to West Virginia's running game, which certainly got there by running the ball a ton. I think Louisville probably presents the biggest challenge. If everyone's healthy on Louisville's offense, they have some of the most talented playmakers that Pitt is going to face this year, although they might not all be healthy. We'll talk about that. And I think, just in terms of facing a Jeff Brohm passing attack, even though they're probably more balanced than I expected them to be, maybe more balanced than you expected them to be when you look at the numbers, facing a Jeff Brohm offense and a Jeff Brohm passing attack is going to be a challenge. It's always a challenge, and this will be their biggest challenge yet. So how does Pitt stack up against this Louisville offense? How, what are your expectations for them? Where have they been good? Where have they struggled? What are some of the biggest questions about the defense? Let's just focus on Pitt's defense here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So big challenge for Pitt coming up here on Saturday as the Panthers host Louisville at Acrisure Stadium on, like I say, on Saturday at noon. That's a noon kickoff. First of a couple weeks of noon kickoffs in a row. We'll see how far that streak goes, and we can talk about kickoff times. We'll talk about kickoff times tonight on the live show. Jim and I always like to talk about kickoff times. You probably know where we stand already. We like those noon kickoffs. Those are always fun to do for a lot of reasons, mostly because we get out of the stadium at a reasonable time, and I can start the post-game show at a reasonable time. But Jim and I will talk about that tonight at 8:30 p.m. right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we have our weekly live Panther-Lair show. Remember, if you want to make sure you don't miss that show, if you want a reminder or something like that, subscribe to our YouTube channel, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go live, so you'll know exactly what we're doing and you won't miss any of our live shows or anything like that. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And also, while you're at it, like this video. So you come out of a game last week where Pitt gave up 100 and how many rushing yards? 174 rushing yards to West Virginia. Ty Edwards went 25 for 141 and 3 touchdowns. The Mountaineers had a lot of success on the ground. They ran the ball a billion times. Not a billion times. It was more like 58 total rushing attempts for those 174 yards, an average of about 3 yards per carry. So not exactly getting gashed, and I think Pitt didn't really get gashed. They gave up some inopportune gains at some inopportune times, but they didn't really get gashed by the running game. It was more like they got bludgeoned to death. And I think there's a number of reasons why that happened. West Virginia was able to have just enough success to make it worthwhile continuing. They went for it on 3 4th downs. They were only 5 of 17 on 3rd down, so it's not like they were getting big gains out of the running game, but they just kept pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding. And ultimately, like we've said, I think we said it a bunch of times last week as far as Pitt's defense goes, they gave up 2 touchdowns through the first 59 minutes and 49 seconds of that game. They were good enough. Right. And if you hold a team to 5 of 17 on 3rd downs, if you get a couple turnovers, I mean, you've done, you only they give up 3 total touchdowns, right? In that, or they gave up 4 touchdowns, excuse me. They gave up 3 rushing touchdowns and 1 passing touchdown. Excuse me. In regulation, they gave up 3 touchdowns. If you get through regulation and a team's, 5 of 17 on 3rd down and 3 touchdowns and 2 turnovers. I mean, I think you've played defense well enough to win. And what we said a lot of times last week, and we don't need to reiterate it here, or at least we don't need to dwell on it here, is that Pitt's defense had an opportunity to win the game by closing the door on either of those final 2 drives in regulation. But I cannot sit here and say that Pitt's defense lost the game. They took a blown save. To use someone else's term that I think is probably pretty appropriate for what happened to Pitt's defense in that game. They took a blown save. That's not to absolve them. There were opportunities to make plays. There were opportunities to make tackles in the backfield. There were opportunities to break up passes. There were opportunities to actually cover guys. And Pitt failed in a number of, of those instances. Overall, I think Pitt's defense is still in pretty good shape, but there's a few things. I think there are a few things that have probably been a little bit better than I expected them to be, and a few things that are a little bit more concerning than I expected them to be. On the concerning side, it's the linebacker depth. The linebacker depth is the biggest concern right now. They only played 4 linebackers in the West Virginia game. Cameron Lindsey was the only guy outside of the starters who played. I think he logged about 7 snaps, and he did so because Kyle Lewis got hurt. One would assume that if Kyle Lewis didn't get hurt, the 3 starting linebackers, Lewis, Braylon Lovelace, and Rasheem Biles, would have played the entire game. That's not good. That's not good. That's too much. Like you're setting yourself up for failure when you rely on the same 3 guys at linebacker, or the same 4 guys at defensive back, or the same 4 guys on the defensive line all game long, particularly with the way West Virginia was going with their tempo, running 93 snaps, I think it was. They ran 90 plays. They had 3 snaps that ultimately were plays that happened, but they didn't officially count due to penalty. You can't have guys out there for 93 snaps. And they were able to rotate the defensive line, although I think they only used like 4 ends and 4 tackles in that game. I don't think they got a ton of a rotation or as much rotation as they probably should have had up front. They did not rotate the linebackers at all, and they really only rotated the safeties when Cruz Brookins had to come out because he was hurt. At corner, they did get Rashawn Murray in off the bench, but I think maybe Shadarian Harrison might have been a little bit banged up, and so we can't. I don't think we can say that they rotated much at all on defense unless they absolutely had to in that game, aside from the defensive line. Particularly in the back 7, they pretty much played the guys who started, and that was basically it. And looking down the snap counts real quick, on Pro Football Focus, Sean Lee, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, every single snap. Javon McIntyre, all but 1 snap. Kyle Lewis, 86 snaps. Cruz Brookins, 85 snaps. Jimmy Scott, 75 snaps. Francis Bruin, Sean Fitzsimmons, and Isaiah Neal, I think we're the only defensive tackles, actually, now that I look at it. Oh, and Nick James, excuse me. So they played 4 defensive tackles. They played 4 defensive ends. And, of those ends, it was Jimmy Scott, Blaine Spires, and Zach Crothers all playing 41 snaps or more. And then Joey Zielinski got like 6 snaps, just like Cameron Lindsey got 7 snaps, just like Josh Garrier got 8 snaps. I'm not going to sit here and say they rotated all that much at those positions when guys are getting single-digit snaps. When there's a weird series of noises there. When the other team runs 93 snaps and you have guys getting single-digit snaps, I'm not gonna sit here and say you rotated all that well or effectively. They pretty much stuck with the starters with a little bit of rotation up front. And I just don't think that's a recipe for success. I think there's a few issues with it. One, if you feel like you don't have quality depth to rotate, you have personnel issues, and you've done a poor job assembling the roster. The other issue is kind of the effect that it has, which is you wear those guys out. I don't know if Louisville is going to run 93 plays against Pitt this, in this game on Saturday. They've only run about 160, 170 plays in their first 3 games. Now they might be around like 180, but they're averaging 60 to 65 plays per game. So they're not going like West Virginia was going. I think they're a pretty balanced offense. They've got about the same number of runs and passes. Their average, they average about 31 pass attempts per game. That's roughly what they averaged last year. You could actually, like Miller Moss, I think through the first 3 games is averaging about 26, 27 pass attempts. Tyler Shugg averaged about 31, 32 last year. Slight drop, but not much. They're averaging 225 or so passing yards per game. They've only got 3 passing touchdowns so far this season and 3 interceptions. So maybe not getting as much from the passing game as you might expect from a Jeff Brohm offense. But they've also got Isaac Brown, who is the ACC Offensive Rookie of the Year last year. He's an awesome running back. I think he ran for like 1,000 or 1,100 yards as a true freshman last year. And he's back. Now, one thing to keep an eye on, he's been really good, or at least he was through the first 2 games. In their last game against Bowling Green, he came out after 1 play. After 1 carry, I should say. He had 1 carry for 18 yards, and then he left the game with what I guess they're saying is a lower leg injury, something like that. And it's worth keeping an eye on because their other running back, is it Duke Watson? I forget if I'm getting the I know his last name's Watson. I should know off the top of my head. Duke Watson, also injured, missed the Bowling Green game. He's only got 9 carries so far this season. He's a really good running back. And even Chris Bell, their stud receiver, who is going to be the best receiver Pitt has faced all season so far, and one of the best receivers they're going to face all year, Chris Bell has been dealing with an injury, Jeff Brohm said earlier this week. So the status for Brown and Watson, the 2 running backs, is up in the air for this Saturday. We'll see if they're able to play. We'll get those ACC injury reports. That'll come out. The first one will come out tomorrow. If I understand it right, and I'm going to try and get some clarification on this, it's supposed to come out 48 hours, at least 48 hours before kickoff. So that should mean it should come out tomorrow morning sometime before 12. And then they have to release another one on Friday, and then their final injury report 2 hours before kickoff. My guess, not to get too far off on a tangent here, my guess is that the Thursday injury report will be very uninformative. Friday, you'll maybe get a little bit more information, and then Saturday, you'll actually get a sense of who's playing and who's not. You'll get the most accurate and informative injury report. So we'll really find out about Brown and Watson and maybe even Bell, who maybe he'll be listed as questionable or something like that. I think the designations are available, questionable, doubtful, out. Maybe Bell will show up as questionable tomorrow. We'll see what the injury report looks like for Pitt and for Louisville. But those are big weapons. Those are really good players who make some pretty impressive plays and have been doing it for a little while now. I mean, Bell and Brown were 2 of the best in the conference last year. Like I say, Brown was the ACC Offensive Rookie of the Year. So far this season, Bell is averaging 15 yards per catch. He's got 13 catches for almost 200 yards and a touchdown. He's the big one to keep an eye on. And it's going to be an interesting test for Pitt's secondary that I don't think has really been tested yet so far this season. I think Duquesne, Central Michigan, West Virginia, none of these 3 teams really tested Pitt's defense, pass defense, I should say, all that much. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind here, a few things to note. Pitt, although they've played 3 games, they lead the ACC in sacks with 12. I think that's impressive. Like never mind just average per game, because there's a bunch of teams in the conference that have played 4 games. Pitt still has more sacks than any other team in the league. And I think that speaks well of their pass rush, because I think anecdotally, and some of the numbers do back this up, they're getting more of a push up front than they got last season. So much of that pressure and plays in the backfield last year came from the linebackers. Kyle Lewis led the team in sacks. Braylon Lovelace had like 4.5 sacks. Rasheem Biles had a bunch of sacks. I think, it was the sack leaders last year. I think it was Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and then Jimmy Scott and Nate Matlack. This year, I think Kyle Lewis still has 2 sacks, which I think still might lead the team. But you're seeing more pressure numbers from the defensive line. And what's particularly interesting to me is that you're seeing more pressure numbers from the defensive tackles. Right now, the 2 leaders, according to Pro Football Focus, the leaders in Pitt's pressure category are Blaine Spires and Jimmy Scott. They have 8 pressures each. But then you get into this run of defensive tackles. And it's, bring up the list here. Oh, I'm sorry. Zach Crothers, Jimmy Scott, and Blaine Spires all have 8 pressures each. But then you get Francis Brew, Isaiah Neal, and Sean Fitzsimmons, all with 7 pressures each. That's notable to me. And it's not just front-loaded on the Duquesne game. I don't think Neal or Brew didn't have any pressures in the Duquesne game. I think he had 4 against Central Michigan and 3 against West Virginia. Sean Fitzsimmons has 7 pressures so far. He had 5 against West Virginia. Isaiah Neal, I think, has spread them out a little bit more. He had 2 against Duquesne, 4 against Central Michigan, and 1 against West Virginia. I think we said in the offseason there was a chance that this group of defensive tackles has the potential on an individual basis to put up bigger numbers and be a little bit more productive than maybe we've seen out of the defensive tackle position in the last few years since Kalijah Cansey left. Pitt hasn't really had much in the way of productive defensive tackles since then. But I thought that there were players here that looked like they could do it. Isaiah Neal is explosive off the ball. He's almost like a car where the brakes have gone out, and that could be a good thing. It can also lead to some chaos, but sometimes chaos is good. Francis Brew is strong, and he looks like he's adding moves to it, and he's really getting off the ball well and making plays. And Sean Fitzsimmons, with 7 pressures, 5 pressures in the West Virginia game, he's making a big impact. I think this is huge for Pitt. I think this is huge for their pass rush because if those defensive tackles can create pressure, it should, in theory, create more opportunities for the defensive ends off the edge and the linebackers coming out of the middle of the defense if you have to account for those guys in the middle of the defensive line. Louisville, for whatever it's worth, their guard and center, one of their guards and their center have each led up 3 pressures so far this season. I think that's second most on the team in terms of pressures allowed. And so there might be an opportunity this week for Pitt's defensive tackles to make just as much of an impact as they made so far, if not more. It's tough to get a real read on Louisville in terms of numbers like pressures allowed because they played Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, and Bowling Green. Not exactly a murderer's row. Whatever you want to say about West Virginia, at least they're a Power 4 conference opponent. And so, Louisville, I think, is still very much in a wait-and-see sort of situation. I don't know if they feel that way. I don't know if Louisville fans feel that way. But it sort of looks that way from here because you don't really know. And the best team they played, James Madison, that game went down to the wire in week 2. That was not it ended up being a 28-14 lead, but it was tied going into the fourth quarter. Louisville scored on a scoop and score about a minute or 2 into the fourth quarter, and it was still a 1-touchdown game down to the last 3.5 minutes when Isaac Brown, who had been pretty pedestrian up until that point, took off for a 78-yard touchdown run. And kind of broke it open, made it a 2-score game. His stat line ended up looking great. And Louisville, won by 2 touchdowns and all of this, but it was a bit closer than that final score would indicate. Maybe there's some opportunities here for Pitt against Louisville. Like we said on Saturday, I think they opened it, 6.5 or something like that. I should let me just look it up real quick and see where it is as of here when we're recording this on Tuesday, late in the day Tuesday. It looks like it's around 4.5 now. So this is saying it actually opened at 5. I don't know what number I was seeing on Sunday, but it looks like Louisville favored by 5 with an over-under 56.5 is where it opened. The number has dropped to 4.5 with the over-under climbing to 57.5. So it's still, Pitt's a home underdog, and understandably so. They didn't look very good against West Virginia, and if Desmond Reed is going to be out, which we think there's a pretty distinct possibility of that, you can kind of understand why Pitt might not be favored. But this is an interesting game. I think I'm really interested to see a number of things, and maybe tomorrow's Morning Pitt will be about some of the things I'm most interested in from this game, but I'm interested to see how the secondary holds up against this Louisville passing attack. I'm interested to see if Pitt's front 4 can get pressure again, and I'm interested to see if they can find any way to get a little more depth on the field at all positions on defense, get a little more rotation, and try to keep guys a little fresher. Although, again, it shouldn't be another 90-play game. Shouldn't. You never know how it might go. So, general thoughts on defense there and how they might stack up against or match up with Louisville. It's going to be an interesting one. Unique challenge for sure. All right, make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll be live tonight with the Panther-Lair Show at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you check in for that. Thanks for watching today. Have a great Wednesday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.